just sell so many records and they're such a popular live attraction that they become a worldwide institution.
They were one of the first true alternative rock bands to really break through into the mainstream.
They're the ultimate alternative band. They're always seen as totally committed and they're very, very individual.
They managed to make the music that they genuinely wanted to make with introspective, reflective lyrics, but still have commercial success.
Got such a loyal fan base as well, who will travel thousands of miles to see them play.
However far away, I will always love you.
They're very much made for the outdoor experience, for a festival experience.
Always love you.
They pervade gothic gloom, lush, layered gloom for decades.
I will always love you.
Robert Smith was born in Blackpool. He was the third of 4 children, and he claims, possibly dubiously, that his first memories are sitting on Blackpool Beach. But the Smith family did move from Blackpool when he was 3. First to Hawley in Surrey, and then to Crawley in Sussex.
It's said that he was quite self-conscious of his northern accent when he moved down south, so he had that kind of feeling of being a bit of an outsider from a young age.
He went to a series of Catholic schools and was raised a Catholic, despite later on declaring himself to be an atheist. And that's quite an interesting juxtaposition. You wonder how that informed his later music.
His parents are musical, but I think maybe the biggest influence was actually his older siblings. He had this sister who is a piano prodigy, really, really good. And he had a kind of sibling rivalry where he realised that he could never be as good as her, so he better do something else. So he picked up the guitar and he said it was great because she had quite small hands and so she couldn't get her hands around the neck, so she couldn't beat him on the guitar.
But then, of course, he had the older brother with the record collection. So that fired his interest in music and encouraged him to buy a very cheap Woolworths guitar, which featured on the first few Cure records.
Again and again and again, you jump in someone else's train.
Robert Smith continued his musical interest once at Notre Dame Middle School, forming the band Obelisk. Smith would not yet feature as the lead vocalist and instead played the piano.
Notre Dame Middle School was a progressive kind of school, not particularly hot on discipline, but very hot on creativity. Robert Smith says that he actually abused it by hardly ever going to lessons, and apparently he turned up in a dress one day and just generally, you know, kind of rubbing up the establishment the wrong way.
Robert Smith formed a band with Lol Tolhurst and with Mick Dempsey, who'd obviously later go on to be in The Cure.
They played a precise total of 1 concert, and then they became Malice, which involved Robert Smith and more school friends. And Robert Smith wasn't a singer, he was the rhythm guitarist at the time.
Easy Cure had about 5 different lead singers, and Robert Smith kept thinking, these guys are useless.
No one else really wanted to put themselves forward. I think all the other members of the band were very much concentrating on getting their instrument right.
They couldn't find anybody else, so he kind of just thought, oh, well, do you know what, I'll do it. And it's one of those moments of real sort of musical alchemy because it works.
He was writing the songs, and I think that's the other key thing. I think after a while, if you're writing the songs, you think, well, this person's interpreting it the wrong way. He also said, I hated my voice. I'm never a fan of my voice, but I hated theirs more. So it was the lesser of 2 evils, I suppose.
With Robert Smith now the lead vocalist, Easy Cure won a talent competition in 1977, which would earn the band their first record contract.
10:15 on a Saturday night.
The Cure got their first recording opportunity through Hansa Records after winning a talent competition, which must have been very exciting for them. The problem was the record label wanted them to be this kind of teen heartthrob band, which was completely the opposite of what The Cure wanted to be.
The Cure weren't really very poppy at all. They were kind of scratchy, second-generation punk. It was a fit that was never, ever going to last. And Hansa heard some of their other material, including Killing an Arab, and said, nah, we're a poppy label, you're not a poppy group. farewell.
Despite this early setback, the band persevered, continuing as the trio of Robert Smith, Lawrence Tolhurst and Michael Dempsey, and renaming themselves The Cure.
Once The Cure became a trio, they recorded some demo tapes and they found their way to Chris Parry. Now, he's the guy who famously missed out on signing the Sex Pistols, but he had already signed Siouxsie and the Banshees and The Jam as well, and he was quite interested in signing another trio. He liked the sound of The Cure.
Chris Parry, a talent scout, heard The Cure's demo and signed them to Fiction, which was the subsidiary of Polydor that he was looking after.
It was under the Polydor umbrella, but Fiction had a degree of independence, which is perfect for a band like The Cure, because in a way they were almost inventing the idea of indie. You know, this was 1978, and there hadn't really been a term like that, and they were forerunning the idea of, you know, this kind of independent DIY band.
Now, the band released their first single in 1978 called Killing an Arab, which was actually misconstrued, obviously given the title, as having racist connotations.
They started getting National Front members turning up to their gigs. This assumption that it was actually a song that was encouraging people to be racist, when actually it was a literary reference.
It wasn't racist at all. It was based on Albert Camus' book, The Stranger. But they had the racist tag, and eventually Robert Smith had to change the lyrics. When he sang it, he changed it to Kissing an Arab, he changed it to Killing Another.
When they reissued it a year later, they actually had to put a sticker on it saying, this is not a racist record, that's not what it's about. But it was a moment of early headline grabbing for the band.
May 1979 saw the release of The Cure's debut studio album, 3 Imaginary Boys. This featured the single Boys Don't Cry, which would form the name of the album for its American release the following year.
I would say I'm sorry if I thought that it would change your mind, but I know that this time I have said too much, been too unkind. I tried to laugh about it, cover it all up with lies. I tried to laugh about it, hiding the tears in my eyes. 'Cause boys don't cry. Boys don't cry.
After the release of their first album, 3 Imaginary Boys, The Cure went on tour supporting Siouxsie and the Banshees. Now, this is really interesting but quite odd. Now, Robert Smith was the lead singer of The Cure, so he was singing on stage with them, and then he would go backstage and come back again as the guitarist for Siouxsie and the Banshees.
They lost their guitarist halfway through the tour, and he stepped up and would end up playing 2 gigs a night. He would play with The Cure and also then with Siouxsie and the Banshees as well.
He says that it wasn't just learning how to play with the band that was that popular, it was taking on board the kind of band they were and the ideas that they had, which were very singular, very unapologetic, and they were a pop band in a sense, but they were wedded to what became known as a gothic ideal, you know, a kind of doomed romanticism.
Siouxsie was always a very expressive, energetic performer, and she didn't really want her Banshees to be in the background, looking at the floor, feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So therefore, in order to pull his weight, Robert Smith had to express himself a little bit more.
I want to take you home.
It's actually incredibly important for The Cure's musical direction. He said that the feeling of being on stage with Siouxsie and the Banshees and playing that music really, really influenced him for the rest of his life and his career in terms of where he wanted to take The Cure.
The image, which has become known all over the world, really started with Robert Smith supporting and then joining Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Make me want to get up. What's that?
The Cure ended the 1970s with 1 album to their name and valuable experience gained as a support band. As the new decade began, The Cure would quickly establish themselves as a driving force in the emerging gothic rock scene. The Cure began the 1980s with the release of their second album, 17 Seconds. Due to the band's lack of creative control on the first album, Robert Smith was keen to impose a greater influence on the record.
The Cure had got rid of Michael Dempsey, their first bassist. They brought in Matthew Hartley. Robert Smith was properly taking over this band now, even alongside Tolhurst. And he had a vision, and it was a kind of gothic vision. It was a kind of gloomy vision.
Robert Smith wanted to take more creative control. He thought that the first album was too lightweight, so he wanted this to be a much more serious album.
He was heading down a much more gloomy route. They had always been, when they started out, they had been kind of a pop punk band. They were into the Buzzcocks and Elvis Costello, and the idea of writing kind of short, sharp, spiky but witty and catchy songs. And with 17 Seconds, he started going into a kind of, you could call it an existential questioning mode.
He began to separate the Cure from their peers and their contemporary. They became much less scratchy. And with this album, he wrote all the words and most of the music.
The Cure's bold style gained much critical acclaim in Britain, earning particular praise from NME, who wrote, "For a group as young as The Cure, it seems amazing that they have covered so much territory in such a brief time."
At this time, The Cure did become the darlings of the British rock press. And I think really it's because The Cure were socially awkward. They were quite self-indulgent, so they were very much like the music journalists that they were meeting.
It was the kind of the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. There was a very kind of pop mainstream sound around that time. And I think The Cure represented the other, the alternative, and the British rock press really liked that and got on board with it.
The innocence of sleeping children, just in white and slowly dreaming, stop time.
The group had an issue with something that was labelled an anti-image. They almost refused to prescribe to any particular genre or any particular movement going on at the time.
He didn't want the band to be pigeonholed. He didn't want them to be easily defined by other genres. So they were anti-rock, they were anti-punk, they were anti-image.
If you have an anti-image, clearly it's an image. And The Cure's image was that they weren't moving about on stage. They weren't doing knee slides across the stage. They weren't waving to people. They were kind of quite quiet. They were letting the music speak for themselves.
There was definitely a move towards much more sad and depressing music.
I think the other band members started getting a bit fed up with Smith's gloomy image and demeanour, and it became a very, very fractious band.
This caused Matthew Hartley to leave the group. He said that they were going in a sombre and almost suicidal direction, something that he had absolutely no interest in.
It made The Cure different. No one else was doing this at that time. The punks were rabble-rousers. The new wave that followed them, that The Cure seemed to be part of, they were too. This made The Cure different.
The Cure's next two albums, Faith and Pornography, cemented their reputation as purveyors of gothic gloom.
Creatures kissing in the rain, shapeless in the dark again.
I think The Cure's third and fourth albums, Faith and Pornography, are the albums that kind of defined what people think of as the Cure sound. That idea of gothic gloom, very dark, very moody, very mysterious. In reality, I think Robert Smith was using his music as a catharsis at that time, as were other members of the band. They were all going through different moments of loss and of grief, and that came out in those records.
The Cure did become these purveyors of gothic gloom, and Faith is 8 tracks of very layered misery.
Faith was a direct link to Robert Smith's childhood, and obviously the majority of the group had met at Catholic school. Kind of ironic for a group of guys who are all atheists and something almost nihilists, as you can see from the content of their songs, to call an album Faith. Now, a real juxtaposition to that is pornography.
Pornography, which is considered, especially by the sort of hardcore fans, the Cure's masterpiece, is not about pornography at all. I have a theory that it's a very depressing album, or at least, you know, it can be uplifting in its depressingness, but it's dealing with a kind of very sort of mordant and kind of gloomy outlook on life. I think it's about a kind of detachment from humanity, which is, you know, what pornography brings.
Pornography was a very bleak record, even though they got Phil Thornalley, who was a noted pop producer, to help them out. But he bent to the Cure.
It's incredibly sombre and morose compared to the rest of their music, and certainly what would come later. I mean, that being said, I don't actually think it's too downbeat and it's too gloomy, but I suppose if you think of what the context of what else was going on in the middle of the 1980s, then yeah, it's...
The late 1970s and early 80s had earned the Cure a positive reputation within the British music scene, and were now recognised for their striking look and accompanying gloomy music. Their rising status allowed the members to engage in a number of side projects.
I called you after midnight, ran until I burst. I passed the howling woman and stood outside your door.
In 1983, the Cure went into a sort of hibernation where they just released a few singles.
They'd been touring a lot. The Cure had been on the road for a long time, so this was the moment where they kind of went back to the studio, took some time out from being in the public eye.
Robert Smith got himself involved in some extracurricular activities. He went back to the Banshees and formed the Glove with Banshee Steve Severin, which was pretty successful. It was a much lighter Cure, and that did well.
Visiting time is over, so we walk away. We both play dead and cry out loud. Why we always cry this way.
He also interestingly gave an interview to Melody Maker magazine where he said that he no longer wanted to make music in that format, i.e. The Cure, suggesting that the group wouldn't be back in a recognisable form anytime soon.
He scored very unsuccessfully a ballet, Les Enfants Terribles. He got involved with the video director Tim Pope on a single that Tim Pope recorded, which did quite well. He started a label, Dance Fools Dance, which didn't last for very long. He and Lowell Tolhurst also got involved with producing and helping write songs for a band called And Also The Trees, who were a little bit like The Cure.
I called you after midnight, then ran till my heart burst. I passed the howling.
I think Lowell Tolhurst started doing some production. It seemed like the band had this huge success, but at the same time, they were a band who weren't meant to be successful in a way. They had a gloomy Cure, you know. They weren't meant to be having pop hits, which they did, of course.
The Cure returned in 1984 with their 5th studio album. The Top marked another change in musical direction for the band.
Top was really a reinvention of The Cure's sound, which is interesting because it harks back to what Robert Smith said before, that they wouldn't see the band again in the format that we'd recognise them. It still had the same old pessimism that we'd got used to, but it also had a degree of optimism in it as well.
The Top was an interesting album for The Cure because it saw them move in a slightly more psychedelic direction. It was quite different to the previous albums, but it actually proved to be quite a successful move for them.
Was almost a Robert Smith solo album, and he did everything on it really, apart from play drums. And it was brighter, it was lighter. Some of the depression that he'd had in previous years had lifted. This was a much more colourful Cure. It had The Caterpillar, possibly his first great single.
It's called their psychedelic album, and it kind of is. I mean, in a way, all of The Cure's music is psychedelic in the sense that it's got a lot of atmosphere. But this was much more of a kind of 60s psychedelic bent, and there's a fantastic song called The Caterpillar. It sounds like a kind of late 60s psychedelic single, but at the same time, there's something so sort of romantic about it in the way that only The Cure can do. And it was definitely a different period from anything that came before or since.
In terms of commercial sales and critical reception as well, it did really well for the band.
It hit top 10 in the UK and also was the first Cure album to break the Billboard 200 in the States, and it was really a change of direction that was actively pushed by the label onto the band.
Simon Gallup had left The Cure in 1982 after a fist fight backstage with Robert Smith. By 1988, Simon Gallup was the best man at Robert Smith's wedding. In between that, of course, he rejoined The Cure, and I think this gave Robert Smith someone to creatively lean on, and it made The Head on the Door a less indulgent Cure album.
Yesterday I got so old I felt like I could die. Yesterday I got so old it made me want to cry. Go on, just walk away.
The Head on the Door, I think, is the moment when The Cure managed to balance out their pop sensibilities and that kind of melancholy goth background.
And I know I was wrong when I said it was true, that it couldn't be me and me her in between without you.
It's a funny one, this. Now, they did shoot a VHS video of a live concert that they did in the south of France, so obviously that has the European resonance, but it's hard to tell why it struck a particular chord in France, in Germany, in Holland, in Belgium, and in Luxembourg, but it did, and that really gave them a European audience.
It's where people outside of Britain began to take notice of The Cure, and they were also building a small cult following in the United States too.
I never thought this day would end. I never thought tonight could ever be this close to me.
They got absolutely massive, and the strange thing about The Cure, I mean, especially The Head on the Door had Close to Me. It's a pure pop song, and it's kind of hard to work out. It almost seems like they're two bands. On one level, you have the band that makes pornography and these incredibly intense, doomed, gothic epics, and then you have a song like Close to Me, which is just a really sweet pop song. And it's hard to work out, you know, the kind of the lightness and jauntiness and perfect pop sensibility of those songs with the sort of misery, hopelessness and all that despair of pornography.
In 1987, The Cure released Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. The double album was well received internationally, and the band's mainstream popularity continued.
Kiss Me was a sign of just how creative Robert Smith was being at the time. Songs were absolutely pouring out of him. It was another commercial breakthrough, and I think it established him as a major talent.
You're so gorgeous, I'll do anything. I'll kiss you from your feet to where your head begins. You're so perfect, you're so right as rain. You make me hungry again.
However, it was followed by Disintegration, which was almost a step back into the very, very dark, bleak Cure.
On the candy-striped legs, the Spider-Man comes softly through the shadow of the evening sun.
By the time of Disintegration, they were a huge band worldwide. And they kind of became the band, in America, they became the ultimate college rock band, you know, and it was like every single disaffected teen the world over had not only a Cure album, but also, you know, a Robert Smith haircut.
This was the moment that they were at the height of their fame, especially in Europe, where Robert Smith was a massive celebrity at this point. And of course, with fame, with money comes excess. And although Robert Smith could always kind of go back to his roots and his family, he had that kind of grounding thing, Lol Tolhurst really struggled with it in a different way, and his drinking started to become a real problem for the band.
As so often happens when outwardly there's a huge amount of commercial success, behind the scenes things really were falling apart. Lol Tolhurst's drinking was getting out of control to the extent that often he had to be replaced during live shows.
So they had to paint little coloured notelets on his keyboards for him to play the right notes at the right time. And this was obviously causing a great amount of friction. And the rest of the band very much lobbied Robert Smith to sack Lol Tolhurst.
Someone else had to come in and replace him. And actually on Disintegration, he's credited in inverted commas as having played other instruments, but in fact didn't contribute musically or lyrically to the album whatsoever.
The Cure's success had peaked by the end of the 80s, with the band earning much recognition around the world. The group, though, had endured a somewhat fractious relationship, with Tolhurst's departure leaving Robert Smith as the only original member.
Lol Tolhurst rather rashly took Robert Smith and Fiction Records to court for an increased share of royalties and to set aside a contract that he'd recently signed.
He thought that it wasn't the Cure if he wasn't in the band. Well, as you know, anyone could have told him that's going to be a mistake.
Unfortunately for Lol Tolhurst, he lost the case, and the judge was very, very dismissive of him.
I could understand why he was annoyed, because he was there right from the very beginning. But Robert Smith is just so clearly his band, you know, and he's writing the material, and it's just so much his vision that the judge obviously felt the same way.
The fallout was that Robert Smith and Lol Tolhurst, who'd been friends and had been in a band since they were teenagers, were then completely estranged and didn't speak for years, and it wasn't until a lot later that they managed to kind of reconcile that friendship and play together in a band again.
You can look at the timeline. I mean, there's been so many of them who've passed through the ranks. I think what it is that Robert Smith has got such a clear vision about what he wants to do, which is what makes the band great. But you can only go along with that for so long. You know, you either fall in with that vision completely, you know, which means taking a subservient role as a supporting musician, or you leave. And it's strange because Robert Smith is a very gentle guy. He's not a kind of alpha male type. He's very sort of, you know, quiet and sensitive and all the rest of it. But he's obviously got a steely vision.
Robert Smith has a very, very clear idea of exactly where he wants to take the band in every sense, in terms of the image, in terms of the music, in terms of the lyrics, in terms of the public persona. And that maybe doesn't always make him the easiest person to work with.
There is a kind of happy ending to this, because after that, Lol Tolhurst moved to Los Angeles, stopped drinking, became a vegan, reinvented himself, and very, very briefly, after writing a letter to Robert Smith, rejoined The Cure for a while. And he has actually thanked Robert Smith for sacking him from The Cure. He said it saved his life.
Throughout the 90s, The Cure continued to enjoy much international success. Wish reached number 1 and 2 in the UK and US respectively, and featured the international hit Friday, I'm in Love. The Cure's next album, Wild Mood Swings, failed to reach the heights of their previous successes. They followed this with the compilation album Galore, which also featured new material, including the single
When you hear The Cure in a movie, it's not just the atmosphere of the music which makes it work, it's also the fact that it's so symbolic of teenage angst, or angst in general.
Essentially just really moody, atmospheric, very cinematic music anyway, and Robert Smith's voice is so much a part of that.
There's nothing you can ever say, nothing you can ever do.
Their music is very atmospheric. Smith's lyrics are very emotional and very emotive. There's a Cure track called Watching Me Fall. I should point out it's a remix of it, but that's in American Psycho. And that really does kind of accentuate and exemplify Patrick Bateman's fractured psyche in the film. So I think it's perfect to outline a movie character who's experiencing some sort of emotional angst, because that's what their music's all about.
They can create an atmosphere. There are long instrumental passages, and it's music that paints pictures. And if you've got a film, it's perfect for it.
The Cure have progressed considerably since their so-called anti-image of the early 80s. Considered rock icons by many, the band's influence continued to spread.
Hello?
Yes. Is this Robert Smith of The Cure?
Yes, it is.
They've created this incredible world which has influenced and kind of cemented itself in social culture, even like appearing in South Park.
Am I too late?
Who are you?
Dude, Robert Smith of The Cure.
Here, you...
Tim Burton's influence as well. They are now so recognisable in pop culture.
Those are your hands?
Tim Burton, especially, has taken quite a lot from The Cure. Anyone who's seen Edward Scissorhands will basically think they're looking at Robert Smith, but with scissors for hands.
That is Robert Smith, there's no doubt about it. It's just Robert Smith with scissors for hands.
Hold me.
I can't.
People have taken parts of The Cure and built their own world with it. And you can see this in, say, Smashing Pumpkins or Interpol or The Editors. Their influence is massive, even today.
This world never stops, you said.
The Cure's next album, Bloodflowers, was released in 2000 and earned a Grammy nomination.
Bloodflowers, for a lot of Cure fans, is the ultimate Cure album. It was their last record they had to deliver for Fiction, so Robert Smith felt he really didn't have anything to lose, and he really returned to the roots of what The Cure had been.
It's sombre, it's introspective, lots of people would call it depressing, but that's clearly what certainly the people who hand out the awards feel like The Cure do best, because it was nominated for a Grammy.
2000's Blood Flowers was seen as part of a trilogy. First there was Pornography, then there was Disintegration, and then Blood Flowers.
And they're the 3 Cure albums which are seen as the Holy Grail. They're the most gothic, I suppose, and they're the most uncommercial, but the ones that the fans want to hear in concert. And so if you want to go and see a 3.5-hour concert of Robert Smith performing Disintegration, Pornography and Blood Flowers, you can.
You want me to lie, not break your heart. I want you to fly, not stop and stop. We want us like everything else.
The Cure's self-titled 12th studio album was a top 10 hit in the UK and America and was critically well received.
Maybe we didn't understand, not just a boy and a girl.
Their follow-up, 413 Dream, produced a number of hits, including The Only One. The Cure continued to headline major festivals and entertain crowds around the world with their live shows.
I think The Cure have always been an incredible live band. Even when they're not promoting any new material, they can headline festivals.
The festivals like Festival, for example, which is a massive, massive rock and alternative festival.
They've got this amazing back catalogue of music, and they're known for playing incredible shows which will delve into everything from the hits to B-sides to rarities, and they'll play for up to 4 hours. They really put everything into it.
The Cure, in terms of their image, are so iconic. It gives people a chance to really see those characters on stage, and it's not something that we get so much in modern music.
With international acclaim and millions of album sales worldwide, The Cure have gained much success during their years in music, with many people crediting them as the group that brought alternative rock music into a mainstream market. The Cure have played a significant role throughout popular culture.
Show me how you do that trick. The one that makes me scream, she said. The one that makes me laugh, she said. Threw her arms around my neck.
Because The Cure have been so successful worldwide, and because they are an international institution, it's hard to think of them as being alternative.
Spinning on that dizzy edge, kiss her face and kiss her head.
They're such pure pop songs, but they're never seen as sellouts. They're always seen as totally committed, and they're very, very individual.
You have to remember, when they broke through, they were actually at the forefront of alternative rock at that time. They were coming out ahead of a lot of really big influential bands who followed them, and they paved the way for those bands.
In an era of post-punk through new romantic and then into 90s grunge, they've been able to maintain a definite identity and have been commercially successful despite making music that wouldn't necessarily appeal to a lot of people.
For all these would-be teenage musicians who are feeling a bit alienated, they look at The Cure and they think, you know, all is right with the world. They think that this is my guy, this is he understands me when no one else does.
They've got an incredible back catalogue of songs which just will continue, I think, to influence new generations of people.
Just like heaven.